there was one temple, not many. What are you talking about, temples? Like, it's almost like there was all of these. It's like they don't understand the Old Testament is what I'm trying to say.
That's very much the conclusion that I got to when I was as I was leaving Islam, as I was on the verge of it, and I was studying the Quran and kind of also studying Abrahamic religion and figuring out what in the world happened here because of the disconnection. And it just looks like the author of the Quran, Muhammad, and the early scholars had no idea about Christianity, about Judaism, about the Old Testament, the New Testament, about these scriptures at all.
A lot of people make a lot of fuss over the hadiths, and I think in a lot of these debates, when Daniel's out there or anybody else is out there, they're not typically going to the hadith. They're usually wanting to try to prove the truth of the Quran by the fact that it was preserved. I don't know how preservation in any way proves that it's true or false. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita, these texts are more ancient than the Quran. They're well preserved. Doesn't make them true. Error can be well preserved. So the real thing, though, that I've noticed that where things get really wacky, and that's not to say that the Quran itself doesn't have strange parts, it does, but a lot of these hadiths, even the ones that are the strong hadiths, they have some pretty wacky things, don't they?
They do. That's an understatement.
Yeah, exactly.
The preservation, actually, Bart Ehrman commented on that, and he had a discussion with a Muslim apologist, Mohammed Hijab. That was like the Muslim apologists were trying to basically use him due to his criticism of Christianity,
right,
to validate their Islamic beliefs, and then he just he completely sold them out, you could say, and basically explained to them that his views don't align very much with Islam at all. That Islam doesn't seem to make sense in its ideas, and his point was also, even if it's completely preserved and even if there is no contradiction, that doesn't mean anything to me at all, because I could say the same thing about a phone book or about different things. But yeah, the hadiths are a big issue, and so normally among the mainstream Sunni Muslims, including Daniel Hikikichu and the others, the majority of the hadiths that you read in any hadith source today, or that you can find in this book, like I have this summarized Sahih Bukhari, which is like Bukhari is the #1 book in terms of the hadiths. It has almost entirely authenticated hadiths in there.
Right.
And
by the way, I was just asking somebody for a book on that, so I'm glad you have that. I'm gonna get
this. Actually, this is it's an all-in-one without repetitions. This Bukhari is normally very long, but this book is it summarizes, it removes repetitions, and makes it shorter. It's still
nice. Yeah, I'm gonna get that. Thanks.
But you should do that. And if you just start from the beginning, you already see some really interesting stuff, like how Muhammad received his revelations, and it explains how Muhammad would start hearing the sound of a ringing bell in his ears. Then he would sometimes pass out, and he would see a strange figure coming toward him and communicating things to him. And he would collapse on the ground. He would sweat even on a not so hot day. Make sounds like the snorting of a camel. It says. Like,
wow.
And and they would cover him up and keep him like that. And then he would gather himself after a while and just like, oh, Allah said so and so and so and so and so. And the thing is, if you analyze it completely from a scientific point of view, that's what is described there sounds very much like he had a neurological
like schizophrenia or something like that. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And also other things like that he sees one of his followers. Everybody else sees that guy, but he then says, "Oh, that was actually Gabriel," and everyone is confused because everyone saw that guy. That was the guy that is always around, and he's like, "No, it was Gabriel. Gabriel looks just like him." It's really weird stuff, And
yeah. Well, for those that don't know in the audience, so in Islam, you kind of have this tradition of the collection of oral statements. If Christianity has oral tradition in the church. Judaism has oral tradition, the Talmud, these kinds of things. So basically, in Islam, you have this collection of what are called hadiths, which are the traditions that kind of elucidate the life of Muhammad and elements of how the Quran was supposedly revealed, right? And
Yeah.
amongst these, there's these classes of weak to strong, right? Who decides that, by the way? Is it just like random noted scholars over the year? Like, who decided the weak from the strong?
I could say, to be very honest and fair here, that is probably the most admirable, in my personal opinion, kind of study in Islam. But the bar there is actually not very high because Islam is not very complex. But so there is a whole branch of Islamic studies, which is the Hadith studies, which again branches out into analyzing all the people who transmitted these oral traditions, the people who wrote them down, their reliability, studies on the text, studies on the language, and things like that. And the studies of that have been around for quite a while. They started around, like, I don't know, 2 centuries after the death of Muhammad, when people started going around and collecting oral traditions. Bukhari is one of those guys who is said to have collected like thousands of them and then put them in a book. He's supposed to have dismissed the vast majority of the narrations that were told to him and only recorded those that are like that can be verified through multiple narrators and things like that.
Gotcha.
And then over the years, other scholars come and decide, okay, this one is reliable, this one is reliable, this one is not reliable. There are some big issues with that, though. Like, for example, that off the start, they rejected any quote, any tradition that came from somebody who is not a Muslim and who is known to be very immoral. So, the problem is you have a real bias here of the very beginning, from the very beginning, because if you don't listen to the non-Muslims, if you don't listen to those who are considered immoral by their standards,
well, it would be immoral based on who we say is immoral. So therefore, right, it's picking and choosing.
Yeah, so you have only those who want to say good stuff and only Muslims in the sources, and then you have a completely biased source.
Well, this seems to be a prevailing issue, and I admit that this kind of bias can exist, obviously, amongst any position. Christians, anybody can have this kind of bias, but one thing that kept frustrating me in the debate was the first hour and a half of the debate with Daniel was the inability to convey to him, and I don't know if he just didn't get it or didn't want to get it, or maybe he got it later in the debate, that like if the Quran is saying you can go to the older prior revelation, right? You can't just turn around and say that, but the older prior revelation is only what the Quran says, you see. Because if I'm a 7th century Jew or Christian and I'm going to verify what the Quran says, and the Quran tells me to go to my texts, that's assuming then that the texts aren't corrupted, because otherwise I couldn't verify it. And then Daniel says, yeah, you do that, but then you verify it on the basis of what's consistent with the Quran.
Which is ridiculous, right?
Which is ridiculous. And it's amazing to me that he never throughout the debate got that. And it's like, there's 3 times in discussion where I didn't expect this, but he didn't seem to know what the fallacies were. It's like he'd never heard of logical fallacies. And I'm just wondering if that's kind of like, for a Muslim, if you're kind of Daniel's sort of strict, approach, like, because I know Dr. Hashmi debated Daniel, and I'm sure he believes in logical fallacies, but for Daniel, it'd be like, well, if I was to give authority to logical fallacies, that would be detracting from Allah, maybe, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, is there basically you have to surrender logical consistency to maintain the system? Does that make sense?
Pretty much, yes. Especially if we're talking about Daniel Kikichu. I had a live stream with this guy. He's known as Digital Gnosis, where I invited him. We decided to sit down and just go through a whole debate between Daniel Kikichu and this guy T-Jump, and then to make note of all the logical fallacies that Daniel Kikichu makes. And it's we just had to pause the entire time because it's very ironic. He loves to say that his opponent is gish galloping, but then he does the same thing over and over again. he always does this false dichotomy of you are either this or you are that. He's like, well, if you don't have Islam, then you see what happens. You have people going around becoming drug addicts and dying in the streets. Dude, really? Is that is that what the world looks like? You are either Muslim or you are, a drug addict dying in a public toilet.
Yeah, that's a terrible argument. Yeah.
Yeah, things like that. And I don't think Daniel Kikichu is a very dumb person. I think he is to an extent quite intelligent, but the problem is that going for this traditionalist view of Islam just makes you dumb for a reason, out of necessity.
Right.
And there is a lot of denial that has to be in your head. There is a lot of cognitive dissonance that has to remain, where you always go for the Islam option in order to maintain your beliefs. And that topic of going back to the Christian and Jewish sources, that's actually a challenge that David Wood and I, we have offered this whole dilemma a lot to Muslims. We have made live streams, challenges. We had people on to challenge us. We said, so the Quran says clearly that that the Christians and Jews should go and read the books that they have. It even reprimands them at one point. It says, why do they come and ask you when they have what we revealed to them? So it's very clear that the Jew in Muhammad's time, or the Christian in Muhammad's time, should go to his own source and read that according to the Quran. And the Quran never says that the previous scriptures were actually corrupted.
Corrupted, right.
All it says is that they distort it with their mouths, or they cover it up. And so this whole idea that it was corrupted, that it was distorted, only developed over the
that's a later
centuries.
Critical argument, right? And by the way, I don't think anybody takes it seriously that Daniel was arguing that the critical scholars would support Islam. That's what higher critical scholar would support the Islam, the Quran. Again, even if you admit that there's an early date Quran that's preserved, I forget the name of some of those manuscripts, has nothing to do with whether it's true or false.
It doesn't.
And
you have to think. I mean, you just pointed it out. We're talking about the 7th century Arabia. If in the 7th century, Allah supposedly, or Muhammad, say that they have the gospel and the Torah, as the Quran says, and that they can go there and read it, then we have to somehow assume that between then and now, those scriptures got corrupted and lost into oblivion. Is that possible? It's not possible. We have the texts from prior to that time. So
right, exactly. Yeah, that's why I kept saying that the older revelation is relevant here. And then he tried to twist and say, oh, so you're saying it's older because it's true. No. I'm saying that the older revelation is what your book tells me to go to. Yeah. You see? Yeah. So the historicity does matter. And it's different for a Christian, because I know that you're not a Christian, but I'm saying that the positions aren't equivalent, because he was trying to equivocate and say, well, you have the same problems. You try to go to the Old Testament and make it say what you want, and then you reject other parts. No, we don't. So there's two different positions. If my position was rejecting the prior revelation, it would be that you would be correct. But the argument is about, as I was trying to frame it, continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and is then Islam in continuity with the Torah and the prophets. That's why I thought it was really important. And I've never heard Muslims really go into this. You've had a lot more experience with this, so I want to get your comment on this. Maybe you think it's not a very effective approach, but my background being very grounded in a lot of, reading the Old Testament. When I was a Protestant, I was involved in some groups that were very heavily Old Testament oriented. So I grew up knowing that very well. And I never have heard or grasped any significance, because it's a huge part of the Torah and the prophets, the place of the temple, the Levitical priesthood, the sacrifice, the altar, the incense, the imagery, the iconography is what we could call Solomon's temple. And I've never heard this explained in Islam. Now, in Christianity, even if you think Christianity is false, it still has a significant explanation in place for all those things, and a continuity with priesthood, Eucharist, sacrifice, all this kind of stuff. Islam is just like, oh, that was all kind of like stuff that Allah just kind of gave to Solomon or something. And then, and it even says weird stuff like, we gave Solomon temples. There was one temple, not many. What are you talking about, temples? Like, it's almost like there was all of these It's like they don't understand the Old Testament. Is what I'm trying to say.
That's very much the conclusion that I got to when I was as I was leaving Islam, as I was on the verge of it, and I was studying the Quran and kind of also studying Abrahamic religion and figuring out what in the world happened here because of the disconnection. And it just looks like the author of the Quran, Muhammad, and the early scholars had no idea about Christianity, about Judaism, about the Old Testament, the New Testament, about these scriptures at all. The Quran keeps talking about the Injil, which is
Yeah.
the gospel,
Right.
which the only thing that was known at that time as the gospel is the collection of the four gospels put into one book, or sometimes they would refer to the New Testament entirely as the gospel.
Right.
But it says that Allah revealed the gospel to Jesus, or Allah gave the gospel to Jesus, and it speaks of it as a book, which is just. We all know that's not how it worked, right? We know that the Gospels are not something that were
Right.
revealed from Allah
The book that
to,
fell out of heaven. Yeah.
yeah, or revealed from Allah to a person, and then it turned into a one book. It was written through a completely
Right.
different process. I will do you one better. It's one of the main things that actually pushed me kind of away was I sat there one day and thought about the Kaaba, which happens to be the main image that everyone gets when you think about Islam. And I thought, wait a minute. So we are always told about the Kaaba that it is the first house built for Allah by mankind in Islam, that it is such an important spot that Abraham was there, that it was so important to him, and so on. But what is the history of it? And I mean, you can easily find that there is no history to the Kaaba prior to the emergence of Islam. Maybe it is hinted at, or maybe it is mentioned in a few sources, but it has little to no significance. Nobody knows about it. It has no connection to Abrahamic religion.
Right.
Abraham is not known to have ever gone to that region in the Old Testament.
Right.
And none of the prophets, nobody has any connection to that region at all. And I analyzed this in length, and I also sat down with
There was one temple, not many. What are you talking about? Temples? Like, it's almost like there was all of these. It's like they don't understand the Old Testament. Is what I'm trying to say.
That's very much the conclusion that I got to when I was as I was leaving Islam, as I was on the verge of it, and I was studying the Quran and kind of also studying Abrahamic religion and figuring out what in the world happened here because of the disconnection. And it just looks like the author of the Quran, Muhammad, and the early scholars had no idea about Christianity, about Judaism, about the Old Testament, the New Testament, about these scriptures at all. The Quran keeps talking about the Injil, which is
Yeah.
the gospel,
Right.
which the only thing that was known at that time as the gospel is the collection of the four gospels put into one book, or sometimes they would refer to the New Testament entirely as the gospel.
Right.
But it says that Allah revealed the gospel to Jesus, or Allah gave the gospel to Jesus, and it speaks of it as a book, which is just. We all know that's not how it worked, right? We know that the Gospels are not something that were
Right.
revealed from Allah.
The book that
to,
fell out of heaven. Yeah.
yeah, or revealed from Allah to a person, and then it turned into a one book. It was written through a completely
Right.
different process. I will do you one better. It's one of the main things that actually pushed me kind of away was I sat there one day and thought about the Kaaba, which happens to be the main image that everyone gets when you think about Islam. And I thought, wait a minute. So we are always told about the Kaaba that it is the first house built for Allah by mankind in Islam, that it is such an important spot that Abraham was there, that it was so important to him, and so on. But what is the history of it? And I mean, you can easily find that there is no history to the Kaaba prior to the emergence of Islam. Maybe it is hinted at, or maybe it is mentioned in a few sources, but it has little to no significance. Nobody knows about it. It has no connection to Abrahamic religion.
Right.
Abraham is not known to have ever gone to that region in the Old Testament.
Right.
And none of the prophets, nobody has any connection to that region at all. And I analyzed this in length, and I also sat down with a scholar on Near Eastern studies and Near Eastern religion. I forgot his name. Shame. But you conclude clearly that the Kaaba has no connection whatsoever to Abrahamic religion when it is supposed to have, when it must have that connection. All it does have is it has a connection to, or a significance to, the pre-Islamic Arab polytheists.
Isn't it pagan?
Yeah, who had several such buildings around Arabia.
Right.
And it was a common thing to have a cube or a similar building and to attach a stone to it, which is probably a meteorite, and to then think this was sent down by God or by the gods and is an object of worship. And that's all it is. And the Quran and Islam adopts that building as the center of worship that everyone is supposed to, face and pray to, representative of Allah. But it doesn't make any sense. It has no.
Well, I mean, the scriptures of Islam says in, I forget which surah it is, but there's nothing like Allah. So I've always wondered, why are we able to do this? Why would we have this sort of created? It's almost like what a Christian would call a sacrament, right? But, But how does that happen? I mean, if a created thing is nothing like Allah or the 99 names or whatever, there's a total severance between the created and the uncreated, is what I'm trying to say. So how then do we have holy things in this system? Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess the sentiment there is a bit different. It's like, so when you explore the idea of praying toward the Kaaba, for example, in Islam, the idea there is that it is simply a place that is favored by Allah, and that He wants all people to come to and to be around, and the imminent place around it is considered protected and holy, which is funny because the pagans had that idea. They treated that as a sanctuary, whose surroundings are holy, sacred. You cannot fight there, and so on. It is months. You go there and you circle it, and the stone is also still important. The stone still carries an importance in Islam, and the stone is said to basically almost record your reverence and your respect toward it when you go there, and when you go to pilgrimage. And Muhammad would point at it and go like Allahu Akbar, and point at it. He would go there and kiss it and rub it. And
so here's what I'm trying. I'm just trying, like, how is that not idolatry given the attitude of? That's what I'm trying to figure out here.
Yeah,
and I mean, I'm not trying to be petty. Like, what steelman that, right? Like, what's their best explanation for that?
I would like to give you an explanation, but I ask this question very often, and I even made I made some analysis on how that just screams idolatry, and the answers you get are just no, it's not idolatry, because in this case it is just Allah wanted us to be. So
He just willed it. Okay.
Yeah, He just willed. He willed it. He wanted us to have unity and to focus on Him there. But you learn things like the black stone will speak in heaven, and will tell, and will basically say, okay, this guy, he was there, he did this, he did that, and you're supposed to go and kiss and worship it, which is something that pre-Islamic polytheists, which pagans did. To them, it was of importance because it was a fertility symbol. They would go to it and they would they would shoot arrows next to it, and then say, okay, this arrow landed in front of this other one. This means that the God of this Kaaba wants us to do option 2, not option 1. He's pleased with that. So that's what it was. It was a very primitive way of worshipping their idols, and Islam just adopts it and just goes with it, and nobody asks why.
Gotcha. Yeah.